You're listening to WVOF 88.5, Fairfield University, and this is The Sweep with yours truly, Ali Haidar.
And I'm Cole Townsend.
The Sweep is an unapologetic progressive talk show in which we discuss wedge issues and a range of topics in a progressive perspective, one that is rarely conveyed on mainstream media. We are joined by a former guest and a good friend of ours, Nick Toledo. Nick is a junior politics student here at Fairfield University and brings similar but often nuanced progressive views. Nick, thank you for joining us again.
Pleasure to be here.
On today's episode, we'll be discussing a recent paper by a Stanford professor about the relationship between climate change and global inequality, an interesting question asked to Bernie Sanders at a CNN town hall last night, Elizabeth Warren's student debt proposal, and, of course, Julian Assange. So I guess we'll get right into it. Colin, if you want to start us off about climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is coming from, as you mentioned, a study by a Stanford professor, and it is based largely off the research of another Stanford professor who was an economist. And what they found was a link between global warming and global wealth inequality. And I think the interesting thing here is until the Green New Deal, I had not really heard too many proposals referencing the relationship between those who are most affected by climate change and economic policy, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of climate change actually promoting and perpetuating inequality. So this was rather interesting. But the paper found, and purported several things, including, global inequality would decrease faster. It is currently decreasing as of right now, but it would decrease faster if not for climate change, which most negatively impacts poor nations. It also speculates that the gap of income per capita between the richest and poorest countries is 25% larger due to climate change than it would be if there were no man-made climate change. When temperatures are hotter than average, economic growth slows in poor countries but accelerates in rich countries. And as you can imagine, if you look at a lot of the nations that are most impacted by climate change, if you look at the Latin American countries on the equator, if you look at, Africa, of course, which, for the most part is blisteringly hot, that makes sense, right? You see less productivity because it's a classic case, right? You had more people come to Arizona in America once AC was a thing, and that's not always readily available, among other things, in many of these nations. So that's a real big problem. And so this really solidifies, like the Green New Deal was getting towards a little while ago, that environmental reforms are necessary as a part of the pursuit of global equality. And so I thought that was really interesting, and I just wanted to point that out.
Definitely. I mean, it's unfortunate, too, when you have these third world countries who are developing, and they're at such a disadvantage because they were, about 100 years ago, most third world countries were under a colonial power. Mm-hmm. And now that they are so far behind in developing, they also not only have to catch up, but they also have to deal with this issue of climate change, which is unfortunate. I think it's amazing how environmental justice really means economic justice,
yeah,
really
absolutely.
Means racial justice. So, yeah. But
it's important to stress that these aren't just like minor inconveniences or things that are sort of happening. There's an increase in disease. People are losing their lives from a large number of reasons, especially from a lot of these natural disasters that we're seeing occur more frequently. This is a serious issue that requires serious and bold responses, not just from the United States, but from the global community.
I actually want to point out, I don't know if any of you noticed it, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the patron saint of this show, put out a video recently with The Intercept depicting a world where America actually decided to really take bold action on climate change. And what was really interesting about it was it had its ups in that, we saved the planet and we managed to stave off the worst effects. But it also talked about negative things like the hurricane over the last year that, destroyed Puerto Rico, but also, predictions about, Florida, flooding and really never coming back. And so some people could call it disaster mongering, but I thought it did a really great job of dramatizing, really important issues. And even though, of course, the Green New Deal failed to receive any significant congressional or senatorial support behind it, I think it's really important that it's at least on people's minds now. And climate change as an issue has been rising up in terms of the polls and, how people rank it in order of their concern. So I'm really glad to see that.
So I think what's interesting, and they mentioned this in the article, one major argument by the conservatives when it comes to withdrawing from the Paris climate agreement or anything about the U.S. Lowering carbon emissions and becoming more environmentally friendly, they always bring up the fact, well, India and China aren't doing it. And they always bring up these other third world countries aren't doing it. But according to the article, it says that Norway, which we all know is a big oil and gas producer, its economy has grown by about 34% through this data. And whereas smaller countries have been dampened, right? I believe it says from 1961 to 2000, the per capita incomes in these third world countries was dampened by 17-30%. So really, it's about, and this data proves that it's not, third world countries don't need to pick up the pace, but first of all, developed countries should. I mean, they're not even feeling the worsened effects of climate change.
Yeah, but I don't think right now we should even be comparing ourselves to other countries. Not even as far as China, India, but even to our NATO allies. It's a question about who we are as Americans and who we want to be. We've said for generations that we are the shining city on a hill. We've tried to prove that again and again, and we faltered quite a bit along the way. In my opinion, this is our chance to rise up. No other country has taken an action as bold as the Green New Deal proposal. And if we want to show the world what American leadership looks like and what the American will can do, the Green New Deal is a great example of that.
I actually want to take the time to dispel a myth, a common misconception about China and climate change. Right now, China actually is leading the fight on climate change, which is interesting because if you talk about like America as a hegemony and wanting to perpetuate that, as so many American politicians do, one way to do that is to lead the fight on climate change, which right now we're losing to China. But in the Green New Deal, we talk about, accomplishing great climate reform through public-private partnerships and also incentives offered by the government. Because the Chinese government has such a tight control over its economy, it was actually able to say, hey, we're going to, have essentially like coal production or, this sort of energy production. And so I'm not obviously advocating that, we have a sort of command economy where we can kind of just take control and say we are going to do this entirely. But I do want to point out that China actually is leading the fight due to their government structure. So when people say that, they're actually just blatantly lying.
So let's assume, and what appears to be a false assumption, that China isn't leading on the climate change table. So who cares? If the Chinese government doesn't care about their environment, why should we not care about ours? People will argue that we should care because it dampens our economy. For instance, if we take away all the regulations, the U.S., the EPA, and all that, it's no doubt that the GDP would grow. However, would that mean that our life would be happier? Would this be suitable for us? And in a way, it would cause such a big externality in the markets where our economy might even crash or slow down. So, and here's the thing. I mean, China has been. I've been catching up with the news in the years prior. China has feeling the consequences of having no regulation on the environment.
Absolutely.
And it's no doubt that Chinese economy is slowing down. Right? American conservatives, these pundits always try to push this idea that the Chinese are going to catch up with us in terms of economic power, and that might be the case in the future, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But here's the thing: I don't think they're going to catch up to us if we put more regulations in the environment for ourselves.
Well, it's the catch-up effect. Generally speaking, economies that start off smaller, grow a lot faster because of marginal returns, right? But when it comes specifically to, the notion of, China as a climate leader, I just want to point out once again, it is a really falsely held notion that we have, and I absolutely agree. Even if China wasn't doing anything to lead the fight in climate change, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't.
Absolutely.
It's a question of moral, and also it's a question of the economy, because what you said before I disagree with. I don't think that our economy would be better off if we got rid of the EPA or anything like that, even in theory, because the Green New Deal was projected to bring a lot of jobs, better paying jobs, to people who are currently, yes, no longer unemployed, but are currently underemployed.
Well, the Green New Deal is like a federal jobs program in a way, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the Green New Deal isn't just proving to the rest of the world what America can do, it's proving to Americans what we can do as a nation. And I think we've just kept touching on this. It doesn't matter what other countries are doing. We shouldn't be comparing ourselves to other countries. We need to do what's best for us and what's best for the American people.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing. The U.S. should be leading that fight, like you guys both saying. But here's the thing. 91% of commodity trading in the world is with oil. And oil is this resource that's kind of cursed us in a way because it can induce supply-side shocks, but it can also, ruin the environment. So if America decides to diversify in the future with the green energy and we get away from having 91% commodity trading with oil, it'll be better for the whole world.
Yeah.
Right? And America would be leading that fight, and it would look way better for us, and I'm pretty sure it would help the economy. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that is something we'll have to see within the next few years. And I'm interested to see what the Stanford professor, I believe his name is Dr. Marshall Burke, who's an economist at Stanford. So we'll definitely see how his work is in the next few years. So moving on. So last night was interesting because CNN hosted a few town halls back-to-back, I believe with Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, and Pete Buttigieg. I'm not sure if I missed anyone, but honestly, I only watched the Sanders one and a bit of the Buttigieg one. But, I only watched 40 minutes of the Sanders town hall, and I found the one question to be interesting. I want to ask you guys how you guys feel about it. I think Sanders did a really good job on the CNN town hall. This is by no means what he accomplished on the Fox News town hall, just because I think he was speaking to an audience that had closer beliefs to him. And so someone asked Bernie Sanders if the Boston Marathon bomber terrorist should have the right to vote. He's currently in jail. I think he's also been sentenced to death. Sanders responded saying that he thinks that that people incarcerated, felons, regardless of who they are, should have the right to vote. He says even for terrible people. And he states this because once you start taking this away, you're going down a slippery slope. And that even if you are in jail, you might be paying the price for society, but we should not be taking away your inherent American right to participate in our democracy. So I guess my thing is, first, I'm not sure why this question specifically referred to Boston bomber. I know it also referred to sexual assault, people who committed sexual assault and all of that, but Boston bomber case is interesting. And whereas it could have been framed as should those incarcerated should have the right to vote. But then I think this is an issue we should talk about.
Well, first, when you're watching these CNN debates, you have to keep in mind that the person running 2020 election coverage for CNN is a former Trump official.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Yeah.
Yes. Her name is Sarah Isker Flores. She worked in the Trump administration.
So what happens when you don't want to sound like fake news and you need to be fair and balanced?
So that is where I think this question came from. You talk about the Boston bomber because you're trying to make this sound absolutely ridiculous. You're talking about terrorism. You're trying to evoke a negative response in people who don't know really, or who aren't that educated on this topic.
No, you're right. I mean, that's why I was serious. I'm like, are they pushing an agenda? Right? And honestly, I wholeheartedly agree with Sanders. I think you should have the right to vote in prison, regardless of what you've done, because that is your inherent right. And I don't think we should let our emotions or passions get to the best of us. I think the Boston Marathon bomber is an awful person, and I'm sincerely glad he got the punishment that he got. But I don't think that just because he did something wrong, we should take away his voting rights. Because, this is something that. This democracy should be consistent among all lines.
A right is a right, and he's still counted in his congressional district.
Mm-hmm.
So initially, I was going to say that, by committing an act as heinous as, a terror attack that killed many people, he so heavily violated the social contract that I personally have no qualms with him being prevented from voting, though I would not feel the same about other people who've committed, lesser crimes, even to the extent of like a sexual crime, as heinous as that is. However, after thinking about it for a little while, I don't know. I can't help but feel that terrorism can be a bit of a slippery slope because who determines what is terrorism? For example, a lot of these stochastic lone wolf white killers, whom I can only, describe as terrorists, a lot of times we do not describe them as such. But if the same attack is done by, someone of Middle Eastern descent or someone who is of the Islamic faith, we're very quick to not only consider them terrorists, but try to tie them to ISIS, even if they don't necessarily have that tie. So because of that, who really gets to determine what is terrorism? Perhaps for that reason alone, I would side with you guys and say that no matter what, I suppose you should be able to vote.
So it's this question of, can the U.S. kill American citizens in Yemen without due process? Can the U.S. lock them up and put them in Guantanamo Bay without due process?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think that also ties in. And it's interesting because, like I said, this was an awful crime, and it sickens me to think about it. But I do think that we have to be consistent among lines. This is an American citizen. American citizens have the right to vote, have the right to participate in this democracy, no matter how awful they've done. A serial killer who kills, many people locked in jail still has the right to vote. Terrorism or not, people still have the right to vote. And it's interesting because it is a good question, although I disagree with how it was framed at the town hall. And that's interesting how someone who used to work with Trump now runs these town halls
and has direct influence over all of the questions.
Exactly. And one thing about these town halls too, there's a lot of them. A lot of these students came from, I think, a college from in New Hampshire, right? Mm-hmm. I forget which city or town it was, but a lot of them came from Harvard too. But Harvard is in Boston. Not sure what they were doing up there in New Hampshire. I don't have any issue with Harvard.
I mean, when you're Harvard, you're there.
I mean, I don't have any issue with Harvard students asking questions, but just I don't know what. I just thought it was interesting. I don't think there's anything behind it. I just think it's just like, why are they doing up here in New Hampshire? I mean, I'd like to see colleges around getting a shot for their students.
I would like to see them come to Fairfield. I'm just saying.
Absolutely.
I've never seen this, and I don't think I ever will, but I would like to see a debate where the town hall questions are asked only by working class people or the working poor.
Now,
we're never going to get that, but
or based on income, right? Which is basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because before we wrap up on this topic, Pete Buttigieg, who had his town hall at 11 p.m., and even Kamala Harris, who had it right after, she kind of had this similar question, but she didn't really answer it. She said, it's something we have to discuss, which I agree.
Well, because Pete Buttigieg has no policy.
And Kamala is an expert question dodger.
Well, here's the thing. Pete Buttigieg said that, no, if you're incarcerated, you should not have the right to vote, which is interesting because if I remember, like a few weeks ago, you both said that he was a progressive. I know you both have
I've had to walk that back.
I know you both have disavowed that. And I'll be fair, I almost fell for the Buttigieg trap.
Yep,
right?
The rise and fall of Pete Buttigieg.
It is. He's like Nick was telling me earlier in class. He's really burned himself out.
Yeah. He did the same thing Beto was, which was people started to like him, and then he started opening his mouth more.
What happened to Beto?
Beto bought into his own hype, and he also lied about his campaign funding. And the moment he started waning before, because if you looked at a lot of the coverage, some of it was very much celebratory, but a lot of it was also, hey, we're going to look at you a lot harsher now that you're not running against Ted Cruz. And then he also, he lied about his campaign funds. He had no policy. And if you look, right, like the people who are popular with Biden because return to normalcy with Obama, and Bernie Sanders because he's actually inspirational and actually has some good ideas. So when you add all that up and the fact that Pete Buttigieg came up and nipped at the same exact base of, as you said, like suburban Fairfield moms.
It was a vicious game of Pac-Man. He just destroyed Beto's base.
You're right. It was pretty hardcore.
If I was Beto, I'd be furious. Be like, who is this mayor coming from South Bend, Indiana, coming up here and taking my capital? I'd be like, I'm Beto. I ran a hard campaign against Ted Cruz, and now my star capital is being taken away by him.
Well, that's how Biden felt when Beto came up and snapped up all the Democratic donors.
Well, it's interesting. I'm pretty sure I saw a poll on Twitter. I forgot which it was, but I think in New Hampshire, Buttigieg is number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
he's doing good right now.
Buttigieg beat out Biden. Yes, I'm sorry. He beat out Biden. In a sense, really, he moved up to number 2, but really Bernie Sanders moved up to number 1. And a lot of the coverage focused on Buttigieg's meteoric rise, but they never actually mentioned that Sanders is doing really well.
He is.
Really well.
Beto's doing good in Iowa. You go to any coffee shop in Iowa and you'll find him standing on a table. I don't think I've ever seen him stand on the ground. Beto really has an affinity for tables, benches, any sort of raised surface.
It's interesting because Beto stands on tables. Buttigieg speaks like 3 different languages or 4 different languages. I'll be surprised if he starts speaking like machine, right?
He taught himself Norwegian because he read a book that only had one translation from the author in English, and he wanted to read more books from the author, so he taught himself Norwegian.
Well, I'll give him credit for that. But yeah, Sanders is doing really well. I think in the same poll, Sanders is in 30% in New Hampshire, and he's leading them all.
He had twice Buttigieg's points, and he just destroyed everyone else.
This is what happens when you run on policy and when you don't run on policy.
Mm-hmm.
So Buttigieg is interesting. I was thinking like all these town halls. I think the hardest part about watching these town halls, and I tweeted about this was.
Please clap.
Which establishment candidate should I watch? Because they all suck. It's like, do I want to watch Amy Klobuchar? Do I want to watch Kamala Harris? Do I want to watch Pete Buttigieg?
You should have watched Klobuchar.
I'd go for Kamala. It's always a good time.
She did some. I didn't watch her town hall, but I heard that she gave a really good answer to whether when she was asked if she was for medical referral. She said yes on the town hall, but she said that she's also for supplemental private insurance, which kind of circumvents this whole idea of having an opt-in plan. But a lot of progressive commentators were saying this was smart of her because she's kind of like playing 2 sides. And it'll be interesting. I don't know do you guys know when the New Hampshire and Iowa caucus and primary are?
They're 200 and something days away.
And also, I'm interested to see in the debates. I could just imagine the establishment right now panicking, deciding which way they are. It seems like they might go with Buttigieg. First Beto,
Well,
Buttigieg.
for now, I mean, we're so far away from the primaries that Buttigieg is the primary, boy wonder for now. But who knows? Maybe Kamala will prove herself right after all, as Nick has said before. I mean, go ahead, Nick. Say what you got to say about Kamala.
There was a pretty great Kamala interview on Pod Save America last week. I was walking down the street and I had to stop. She said she has complete expectations and certainty that she's going to win the primary and the general. And my whole body froze. I didn't know how to respond to that. First of all, on every campaign I've worked on, if you say the word win, you're out. That's it. I've never heard any campaign worker let you say anything close to win or victory.
And shout out to Alex Tintinsky.
Oh, come on. Why do you have to
No
do
jokes,
that?
no jokes. For those of you who know, you know. But anyway, it seems like Biden might be running this Thursday.
Oh, God.
That's what I think the Hill was reporting. Not running, but announced to run this Thursday. So it'll be interesting to see. But anyway, I'm excited. It seems like we've got a good, plethora of candidates, right?
Breaking up that SAT vocab.
Of course.
I know. Well, let's move on to better candidates, though.
But here's the thing. We will, but let's take a break first. So for those of you listening, thank you to the sweep. We'll be right back, and we'll discuss some more juicy topics, like Colin said, from better candidates. That doesn't mean Buttigieg, but we'll be right back. Stay with us.
I'm Beyonce with an important message about hunger in America. Did you know 1 in 8 people struggle with hunger? Over 12 million children live in homes where there isn't always enough food. Food banks are experiencing more demand than ever. Show Your Helping Hand is a nationwide campaign with the goal of helping Feeding America deliver millions of meals to local food banks. Please join me in showing a helping hand to fight hunger. More information is available at showyourhelpinghand.com.
Today, my new dad threw a barbecue.
I burnt everything.
And then we played catch.
I broke Mr. Lewis's window. And then, somehow, my hand. My hand!
And then my dad even let me drive his car.
The hospital's on the right! It was a rough day.
It was a great day.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of kids in foster care will take you just as you are. For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
I lost my job.
I lost my home.
What is the cost of drug and alcohol addiction?
I lost my health.
I lost my self-respect.
I lost my freedom. If you have a drug or alcohol problem, remember, treatment is effective and recovery is possible. For information on drug and alcohol treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP and see what you could save.
With recovery, I got my life back.
You're listening to WWF 88.5, Fairfield University, and this is The Sweep with yours truly, Ali Haidar.
And I'm Cole Townsend.
And we're joined with?
Nick Toledo.
And we're back. And speaking of town halls, we'll be discussing a better candidate, Elizabeth Warren, my number 2, and her spectacular plan to handle student debt. And, Elizabeth Warren does not get a lot of attention from the media, even though her ideas are beautifully progressive, right? She's had some criticism when it comes to her wonkiness. I personally don't see a problem, and I value the wonkiness. I think the more wonkiness, the better. But other progressives, I guess one that we always mention, Kyle Kulinski from the Secular Talk, has come out and said that she has to be more concise and practice her brevity, which is a fair criticism. But like me personally, it doesn't really affect me. And her plans have come with what she wants to accomplish and exactly how she wants to pay for them. We see this with her newest plan, like I said, with student debt. So basically, what is her plan? So on her town hall, she proposed a $1.25 trillion plan that cancels student loan debt and eliminates tuition at every public college. And of course, people would ask. I think whoever was, I don't know who was talking or interviewing her at the town hall, but the person asked, how is she going to pay for it? And she said she paid for it with an increase in taxes for America's most wealthy families, her wealth tax. And other taxes and corporations, which, interestingly, her campaign says that the wealth tax would raise $2.75 trillion over 10 years. And so in addition to eliminating undergraduate tuition at public colleges and universities, she would expand federal grants to help students with non-tuition expenses and create a $50 billion fund to support historically black colleges and universities, which is interesting. I'd love to deep dive into that. She'd also eliminate up to $50,000 in student loan debt for every person with a household income of less than $100,000, and borrowers who make between $100,000 and $250,000 would have a portion of their debt forgiven. And so a Warren aide, and I didn't know this, which is really, really fascinating, a Warren aide who was with the campaign noted that a vast majority of student loan debt is held by the federal government. So it's as simple of writing it off. And so Sanders, as we all know, our favorite candidate. I'm not sure about you, Nick.
No,
but
I am Warren through and through.
So we'll get more into that, too. He's pushed this idea of free college, but Warren has actually pushed for eliminating debt, which I don't think Sanders has specifically come out for. And she's also legit revealed her policy.
Warren is the wonkiest of the wonks. I want to make that clear.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yes.
But here's the thing. Let me know that, according to her, only public college would be free, so this would exclude private universities. And so I want to kind of unpack this and go through this. I think this is a wonderful idea, something that other candidates such as Klobuchar and even Buttigieg, who have come out against eliminating tuition for college, and I don't even think they've come up for specifically debt.
Is Klobuchar even polling?
I believe Mike Gravel is polling higher than Klobuchar. Klobuchar, I'm not sure what her plan is. She's taking a very I'm just going to describe it, a very center-right kind of, approach to this, which is just really weird. I mean, at least Buttigieg and Kamala Harris are coming out and trying to co-opt.
They're pretending to be progressives.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we appreciate the effort.
Like, Klobuchar, just try, please.
I mean, I guess to some extent I appreciate the fact that Klobuchar is, being extremely honest. She didn't try to hide her anger issues. She was like, that's how I'm going to deal with Putin. And she's not trying to hide the fact that she's very centrist right. But, speaking specifically on the fact that a lot of, student debt is held by the government, that is absolutely true. And I think what's interesting there is people don't seem to understand this, but, student loans, there is a bubble forming around that, and it has the potential to be a very detrimental bubble, with the impending recession. Recessions come every 10 to 12 years, essentially. And, we're likely going to have another one very soon. And when you look at student loan debt and you look at the bubble around auto loans, it could be a bit of an issue, especially for people who aren't making that much money, right, and who have a lot of debt. And a good way for the government to stave off the worst impacts of a recession is through, 1, low interest rates, and 2, high government spending. And, I mean, this would be an interesting way to do it.
It's about a lot more than just a potential recession. College is sold to young people who in reality are way too young and way too dumb to be making financial decisions like this as a necessity and their pathway to a good life. And then they spend the rest of their lives drowning in debt from college prices that continue to skyrocket while wage growth, in contrast to inflation, is stagnant.
Absolutely, and it's an important topic to have, and people, the conservative outlash to what Warren's proposal is actually hilarious, and honestly, it's very sad because it's very backwards thinking. For instance, there's a title from the right-wing Washington Examiner, and basically the title was, quote, Elizabeth Warren's plan to cancel student loan debt would be a slap in the face to all those who struggle to pay off their loans, unquote. And this is such an counterintuitive
in the same way
thought.
that antibiotics are a slap in the face for everyone who died of the plague.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I'm really mad because I died of bubonic plague in 1667, and I am miffed that we did not have antibiotics back then.
It's so counterintuitive. I'm not sure why this is such a big deal. I didn't even bother to read the article, and I might go back and read it, but I just went off the title because a lot of people on Twitter were retweeting this and saying this is a fair point. No, it's not.
No. I have many. I'm going to pull that. I have a black friend card, but I'm going to say I have many conservative and libertarian friends. And I just heard one actually not long ago, earlier today, 30 minutes ago maybe. Well, we've been on the show for 30 minutes. 45 minutes ago. Talking about how it would be a slap in the face to everyone who had to pay it off, and it would be decentivizing people who would otherwise work towards degrees that would get them more money to pay off the loans. And that's just not true.
If we keep looking back at what other people didn't have help with, how are we supposed to make progress?
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Well, that's why it's conservative.
But also we're in a completely different place than our parents. Graduating college in 85 and graduating college in 2019, you have a significantly larger portion of debt now than you did then.
Well, also, going off what Colin said, and what kind of you said too, the conservative movement isn't only conservative, it's regressive. It's so regressive. They're so, this whole idea of Horatio Alger, right, that we talked about in our politics of race, class, and gender. You got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Rugged individualism. Let's not help everyone else because those who came before us did it themselves and we can do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but those that came before us didn't have to handle such, like Nick said, backbreaking debt.
And there's also, you were making more, in real income. You were making more getting out of college in 85 than you are now. Because part of the reason why we support free college in general is because it's an admission of, hey, college now might be what high school was decades ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Where it's now becoming standardized and expected, and you might end up drastically limiting, not just drastically boosting yourself by taking college, but drastically limiting yourself and your potential by not going to college.
So, and I kind of want to go off. Buttigieg, I believe, I didn't watch the town hall, but I've seen a clip. He stated that he's not for free tuition because he doesn't think that's fair for majority of the population to subsidize something that only a minority of the population will go to. But in a way, is it only a minority of the population really goes to it because it's so expensive?
Yeah, if it's free, that wouldn't be the case.
This is a Harvard grad Rhodes Scholar who I don't really think grasps the idea that we have a middle class that basically spends 40 years of their life in indentured servitude.
Basically, and going off of this, and Nick, this is kind of going. I have a question for you, right?
All right.
And so, me and Colin were big Bernie people, right? And I think it's fair to say, Colin, Warren is your second?
Yeah, and just to, give a little context to that, if Warren had more sway with voters and all that, I would potentially support her as my first. I love her policy. I feel like she's significantly built on what Bernie said in 2016, and Bernie's just running on his 2016 rhetoric, but this time he plans to win.
So I agree with you. So Warren is my close second because universal child care, expand affordable housing paid by her new taxes on the wealthy, elimination of the electoral college, promising to rein in uncontrolled capitalism, breaking up technological giants such as Amazon, Facebook, new regulations and promoting new regulations aimed at protecting public lands, and reversing consolidation in the agriculture sector. These are all things I'm for. And so I guess, me and Colin had a great discussion with a friend of ours, Alex Sintinsky. His name will come up now and then on the show. And he told us that when he looks at a candidate, he wants to look at their policy, I believe, but also the likability of them winning. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what you were saying, Colin, right? Sanders has the name recognition. He's got more sway with the voters, whereas Warren is kind of a newcomer because she wasn't in 2016.
And not just that, it goes a little bit deeper. some people, like some liberals, are angry at her about the whole Native American Pocahontas thing. I'm not angry at her about that, but what I will say, she took Trump's bait, and that signals to me the potential to allow Donald Trump to define you. And how did he defeat all of his primary opponents? He defined them and dismissed them as a result. And so I'm just a little bit worried. Hopefully, maybe she's learned from that mistake, and she will come back stronger and harsher than ever. But in case she hasn't, I'm just a tad bit worried about that.
So also, I guess for me also, Warren's foreign policy, I've said about this. I don't really know her stances on it because I don't think she's really come out. Also, Sanders, I think, even though a weakness of his back in 2016 was foreign policy, he's come out in certain areas in foreign policy where I truly support him. Calling the Israeli government racist is telling the truth. Especially when Netanyahu was reelected. Venezuela, right, putting pressure on the U.S. government not to overthrow the Venezuelan government, even though he could go further on a lot of things in foreign policy. So that's my thing. So I guess for you, Nick, there's not a doubt that you're a progressive, right? You are a progressive.
Yes.
And a very knowledgeable one. And so I guess the thing is, my question is, why is Warren your number one compared to Sanders? Is it because Warren is more wonkier, has more things?
Yes, she has. Warren, in my opinion, has more in-depth policy. And you said something earlier, which was that people don't think she's concise enough. I think that's her strength. I don't think we win from shorthanded talking points. We've tried that for 3 decades. It got us the Affordable Care Act. Come on. So, I mean, a great thing, but it was just a stepping stone. It was building to something bigger. And we don't win. We're not going to win over voters who wouldn't otherwise vote Democratic with talking points that are going to appeal directly to progressives. It's going out there and being bold and taking the time to explain these bold progressive policy measures and why they're good for all Americans. And that's what Elizabeth Warren is doing. And to the point you made earlier about likability, I don't think she's unlikable. I think she's not getting the media attention, and she doesn't have the name recognition. I think that her secret weapon is going to be the fact that she's not doing big media events. She's at coffee shops. She's doing a lot of private, non-media hosted town halls.
She's at the actual protests and the strikes.
And she's delivering her policy message. She has her speeches down, and she's going over the details. She's trying to explain to Americans why her vision in detail is going to make their lives better, which is how you get voters who are on the fringe to come into the mainstream.
So I'm a little worried because as of right now, she's literally third in her own state. She doesn't have a firewall. However, there's, a common knowledge among, politic wonks, essentially, that even though we obsess over the polls incessantly, at this point out, this far from the primary election, they probably don't really matter all that much, if at all, to be totally honest. I saw a lot of race, horse race coverage, I believe. But my point is, if, Warren gets to the debate stage, and because she's so articulate with those issues, she rises to the top, and she's very visible, people are supporting her, she has a good chance. I may very well support, Warren, when it comes to throwing my vote.
Look, the Iowa caucus is until February 3rd, 2020. Any poll you're reading now means absolutely nothing. A poll you're reading right now has the same accuracy of you putting all of the candidates' name up on a wall and throwing a dart at it. So don't focus on that. I blocked 538 on my home router.
538 is interesting because recently Nate Silver has come out and he said some like weird claims regarding like Buttigieg and he said something about how Buttigieg said that when he made the argument that Sanders is no different than Trump. Kind of Nate Silver defended that argument. It's just like, what are you talking about, Silver? So yeah, I agree. The polls don't really matter, and I think, if anything, I think it's unfair, and I think it's honestly BS that Warren has not been getting the attention that she deserves, whereas Buttigieg has been getting more, whereas Warren is legit giving us policy details. Progressives have been wanting policy details for years, and we're finally getting
40 years.
Here's the thing. Sanders, I will say, Sanders brought the platform, but Warren has built off of it and has gotten more in detail. So I will give her that. Like I said, Warren is definitely a close second, and I'm interested to see how she goes, and especially when it comes to foreign policy in the future. I don't know if you know anything about her foreign policy, Nick, but
No, I haven't seen anything yet, but she is doing a very slow rollout of policy because she's going so into detail publicly. But what I will say is online, on the news, in your papers, people are going to be shoving polls in your face for the next 2 years. Ignore them. They're absolutely meaningless.
Yeah, that is what I was talking about before. It's called horse race coverage, essentially. And a lot of times most times it really doesn't mean anything, and we spend way too much time talking about that, which is why I like on the show, we don't just discuss that, we also discuss their policy and all that stuff. We dismiss Buttigieg and his place in the polls because he has no substantive policy, and that's not worthwhile. My only thing is, in general, beyond the polling, she just seems to have lack of visibility. And I've conceded already that she may become more visible, especially I think her strength may be the debate stage because she's so articulate and she's so well thought out. And if that happens, I'm more than willing to throw my support behind her because she has beautiful ideas and a wonderful brain.
Yeah, and you got to keep in mind that Bernie does take labor PAC money.
That's true.
Warren's taking no PAC money, so she's getting a lot of small donations, but she's not matching the others in terms of overall capital. So her money right now is being spent in Iowa and New Hampshire and all of the other close primary states. So we're not getting exposure to her here in Connecticut because she doesn't have the funding for that yet. She needs to build off the momentum of hopefully a success in these other states.
It's interesting you say that, the labor PAC. It's not necessarily directly related, but I do want to point out one contention that I do have with Warren is she went on the Young Turks a little while ago, maybe a month and a half out or something like that. And and Bernie takes labor PACs, yes, which is a soft corrupting force. It can be corrosive and corruptive, but not nearly as much as corporate PACs. But Warren has stated that while she's taking no PAC money right now at all, when it comes time for the general election and were she to make it and become the Democratic candidate, the Democratic nominee, she would in fact take PAC money. So that is one area where I do have to give pause to Warren, though, I will say.
So I'm a bit different, but I don't think accepting labor PAC money, I think, is a plus. I don't think it's detrimental, right? I'm only super skeptical of the corporations.
Well, the issue is what happens when you have to weigh certain labor forces over others, not out of what is most valuable or what is most beneficial, but based on what labor PAC has supported you the most.
Well, Warren was a little tricky about that because the PAC money should be getting would be going into the DNC. So whoever was chair of the DNC, that would then be their problem. And in 2020, there's going to be, after the election, there's going to be a vote for a new chair of the DNC, which means Warren, as the leader of the party, can just oust the old chair, and all of a sudden there's no one who has to pay back all of the people who gave us the money. And if we pass our anti-corruption bill, bing, bang, boom.
So Tom Perez, who is currently the DNC chairman, is just awful, right? I was going to say, I've never liked the dude. Former, Labor Secretary under Obama. He had a race with Keith Ellison, who I wanted to be DNC chair, right? He became deputy, but I think he resigned, and now he's the Attorney General of Minnesota. So one thing I do want to say, because we said a lot of things, so I do think we have to be super skeptical of the polls. However, I might come to the level that you are, Nick, and just completely block 538. Yep. However, I do think they give us a
disease.
I think they do give us a good general consensus of where everything is. However, I will be super skeptical of all polls, and everyone should be, right? Before 2016, especially after 2016. And so I think that, I'd love to see Sanders come out more with more policy deals, just like Warren. But then again, it's the question, does he have to? Because people already know his policies. However, I don't think it would hurt. So, but it would be interesting to see how it goes. And, Nick, when we have you again in the future, and if your opinion does change about Warren or Sanders, let us know. But by the way, Sanders your second, or
Sanders is my second.
Second is your Sanders. Okay,
fair enough.
Fair enough, right? I wouldn't be.
You're allowed back on.
You're on apology progressive.
No. Of course, Kamala Harris is my second.
Definitely. But
goodbye, Nick. It's been real nice knowing you.
All right. So for those of you listening, thank you for listening. We're gonna take a quick break again, and we'll be talking back about some old news, specifically about Julian Assange and some other things if we have the time to get to it. But thank you for listening. We'll be right back.
Incognito are taking care of your eyes without even knowing it. For more easy ways to keeping your eyes healthy, see your optometrist or visit AOA.org. Charlie.
Hey, did you see that play last night?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and they still lost. You know, when I was playing, what we tried to...
You played in the street.
I played in the service. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is the kid, he should have...
Yeah, Hey, you okay? Someone call 911!
2 out of 3 people with diabetes die of a heart attack or stroke. But you can lower the risk. Ask your healthcare provider how. For more info, go to diabetesactnow.org. Brought to you by the American Diabetes Association and the Ad Council.
Clutching the envelope tightly, I stepped onto the ladder at the bottom of the treehouse. Something caught my eye above me and I looked up. Light! It looked as if there were a firework display going on inside the treehouse. Crackling and snapping and whizzing sounds spun around above my head. Light shot out in sparks, dancing to the popping of noise. And then I looked up and saw... To find out what happens next, read Philippa Fisher's Fairy Godsister by Liz Kessler. Explore new worlds and check out more cool books at your local library. And visit read.gov. Brought to you by the Library of Congress and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WVOF 88.5 Fairfield University, and this is The Sweep with yours truly, Ali Haidar.
And I'm Cole Townsend.
And we're joined with...
Nick Toledo.
Thank you for those of you listening. We're back, and we'll be discussing the topic of Julian Assange, a topic that we wanted to discuss about the last show, but we didn't have enough time. It's about a week old news, but I still think it's important to talk about it because I think because we have 3 different progressives in here with, me and Cole are basically the same person, but also Nick brings with like a different approach. So interesting to see how this goes, but I think there might be some consensus. So little backstory. So the Ecuadorian government on April 11th has suspended the citizenship it had granted to Julian Assange, who was the founder of WikiLeaks, and evicted him on last Thursday, clearing the way, or 2 Thursdays ago, clearing the way for his arrest. The Ecuadorian host had displayed growing impatience, listing grievances including recent WikiLeaks releases they said interfered with other states' internal affairs, and personal discourtesies, like the failure of Mr. Assange to clean the bathroom and look after his cat, which is interesting.
Well, furthermore, he was smearing his own and the cat's feces on the walls.
That is disgusting.
And if you were crashing on your friend's couch, I don't think they'd be really keen on letting you stay if you were doing that.
Was he actually doing that?
Yeah, and he was also putting ties on his cat. I don't know if you've ever tried to put a tie on a cat before. Probably not.
So I've got to ask. It's my understanding that I will admit, first and foremost, I did not read the article, but I saw a headline stating that Assange had undergone significant mental and physical damage and trauma while under, the protection of the Ecuadorian embassy. Is this the case?
I don't know, but I can see Assange is a weird guy.
Yep.
Because I've seen a video of him skateboarding the embassy and shouting at some
yes,
guards.
Oh, that's
that
another
like
thing.
A lot.
So here's the thing. So I guess a little more backstory. So Assange has been publishing archives of secret American military and diplomatic documents since 2010, provided by Chelsea Manning, who is back in jail for refusing to testify in front of a court. And they basically released information about senior officials in the administration, possible war crimes committed by the U.S. Army. The Obama administration explored whether or not to bring charges against him, but decided not to because of fears of creating a precedent that would kill traditional journalism. But in November, the Trump administration filed a secret accidental court filing that appeared to have secretly charged Assange with some unspecified offense. And so this is all about this debate about classified information and whistleblowing. It's ranged from the Pentagon Papers to the Panama Papers to WikiLeaks. I personally don't know sure how I feel about it as a whole, but honestly, without Assange and WikiLeaks, we would have not found about the atrocities committed in Iraq and Afghanistan with legit video footage of a helicopter gunning down civilians.
For fun.
Yes.
And so something sinister might be going on. So I'm curious to see what you guys think.
Yes, but there is a danger to Julian Assange. For the past couple of years, WikiLeaks hasn't been what the sort of utopian information sharing website everyone thought it would be. We know for a fact he's been getting a significant portion of the documents he's released over the past couple of years from the Russian government. Meanwhile, we've found that other sources have given him incriminating information about the Russian government of about equal importance that he then refused to share because his buddies at the Kremlin have been supporting him for a while. So what happens when a so-called journalist becomes an arm of state media?
It's interesting because I think the question is, what's the charge against him? Is it the charge for the Iraq and Afghanistan videos or whatever, or is it charge for his role and WikiLeaks' role in interfering in the U.S. election?
It's my understanding that the charge is about aiding Chelsea Manning in the hacking specifically.
Yes.
That is the charge. I believe it has been specified. It may have been unspecified when it first went out, but as of now, it has been specified, it has been quantified. We know that. And for that, the issue has always been, technically speaking, that yes, for hacking, you can be charged. If someone has hacked and given you that information and you disseminate it, you cannot, face persecution for that.
So I think this is how we should go about this, right? Let's take a step back and let's imagine we're not specifically talking about Julian Assange, but we're talking about just the field of it, right? Edward Snowden, all these people who have done it. So
Snowden was a completely different case.
Absolutely, right? But I think it still fits in the area of releasing classified information for the sake of the American public and for the sake of, I guess, good morality, right? Yeah. So I think that it's interesting. I think we look at this case by case. I'm not sure if the government should pass a piece of legislation where they provide, immunity for the people. Like, there's not a sort of immunity, but like kind of like they're more lenient when it comes to it. But I think something Obama kind of did, and I think that he should have done more, was when Chelsea Manning granting her clemency, but not pardoning her, which was kind of weird. But I think that we should look at this case by case, or the government should. And like I said, it's all about what he was charged with. I think if Assange was charged with aiding Chelsea Manning in terms of information regarding Iraq and Afghanistan, I think those charges should be thrown out. Now, if it's a charge regarding WikiLeaks and Russian interference, I don't know. And it's the question of, can we trust the government? And it's ironic because we're always talking about big government, right? Can we trust at least the foreign apparatus of the foreign policy apparatus of the government that this isn't the nefarious, right? They're gonna, that they're really only going after Assange because of what he did in regard to Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's just weird. I'm not sure how relevant, like, him with feces and stuff, like on his wall and cat, which is still weird. I mean, there's definitely some. If that's true, there's definitely some sort of mental degradation going on.
And I mean, you could expect that when you have lived the way Assange has for the last several years.
I mean, also it's funny because I bet the Ecuadorian government has been under so much pressure from Obama to Trump to like evict him.
Interesting that Obama, actually, I want to point out, decided not to take any punitive measures against Assange, because we all blame Trump for being like terrible to the media, and I mean, to an extent he is, but I do want to point out that Obama was quietly like the worst president ever when it came to like media cracking down on leakers and placing pressure on these writers and their sources.
Do you mean worst president in terms of allowing them to go, or cracking down on them?
Cracking down on them.
Okay, so it's interesting, right? No, I agree, and it's interesting because, well, he granted Chelsea Manning clemency. He didn't do the same thing for Edward Snowden. It might be because Manning kind of did it. Well, it was under his administration under Manning, right? Yeah. It was 2010. But I'm wondering if because Snowden had a more bigger impact with the NSA, which I'm not sure, but it's interesting how he did one thing for another. Maybe it's because they had Manning in custody, whereas Snowden, I don't know where Snowden is, but I think he's
Russia,
right?
Yeah, I think when we talk about creating legislation surrounding leakers, I think we need to focus these investigations on motivations. And I know it's hard to prove a motivation, but that needs to be the focus. We need to be going, who are they talking to? What governments were they in charge with? Based on their history of everything they've done, who benefits the most from this? And what is their end game? Edward Snowden's case, as far as I'm aware of it, it looks like what he was doing he thought was genuinely for the betterment of the American public. Edward Snowden, but Julian Assange is a different story.
So, that being said, do you have a personal decision as to what you think should happen with Assange? Because it sounds like, following the line of logic, assuming that he really is, an arm of the state media, as you said, for the Kremlin, do you then think that Julian Assange should be charged?
At The Hague.
I don't know about The Hague, but
or in some international court.
I have to look more into this, right? Because it's interesting, and there are a lot. This is where progressives divide on this. Right? I'm not specifically talking about us, but there are progressives who say that who've bought into like this whole idea of like the Russians really affecting our election. There are progressives like Kyle Kulinski and a lot of these weird. I don't want to call them weird, but they have an interesting take on foreign policy, especially when it comes to decimating information. They say basically it was just Russian hysteria.
Yeah.
So I have to look
I feel like that's not a French thing because David Pacman, Jimmy Dore was viciously he hates anything Russia related.
I guess a better thing would be Dave Pacman. I'm not sure where he stands, but is he more skeptical of the investigation?
Skeptical, and it's my understanding basically he could see some Russia interference, but ultimately not having that big an impact and not being a key democratic strategy for 2020 and not seeking impeachment.
I think we can all agree that it's not a key democratic strategy, but I think they disagree where if action should be taken or if Russian interference was something
substantive.
Right?
It is something substantive, in my opinion, at least. Everyone go watch the Active Measures documentary on Hulu.
I did, actually.
It's
lots of fast pictures, and you don't really follow much of anything as far as I'm concerned.
The end game is we have a great intelligence apparatus. We need to do a wide-scale investigation and have a fully released public report on active measures on an international scale, not just in the 2016 election. We need to, I think, go with our international allies and partners, and we need to really figure out what's been going on.
So, this is an interesting conversation. We'll definitely see this in the future because this happened a week ago. But anyway, we have to cut things up because we have an awards ceremony to go to. Colin's getting an award for being for having the most poofiest hair on campus.
I would probably win that award. That is true.
Yes.
But anyway, Nick, thank you for joining us. I believe
My pleasure.
You are probably going to be joining us next week in terms because we'll be talking about the Mueller report. Speaking of Russia,
I'll be happy to be back.
Now, before we go, I think we should try signing off with something a little bit different. And for the audience, we haven't discussed this beforehand, but maybe just leading off with our Twitter handles or anything like that, so people could find us in case they're interested in hearing more.
Sure, Nick, you want to go first?
Follow me on Twitter at NickT one and only.
I am actually just the Sweep Cole, so check me out on Twitter.
I am Lebanese Ali, Lebaneseali. Interesting name, but follow us.
He'll link it on the YouTube video.
We'll link it on the YouTube video.
Ali and I also write for the Fairfield Mirror, so if you're interested, I personally have a piece coming out tomorrow about income inequality and a necessity of resistance, essentially. Ali, I believe you're done writing for the year, but you've written a wealth of wonderful works.
Check it out.
So be sure to be on the lookout.
Have you written anything, Nick? Maybe prior to Fairfield Loyola?
Nothing of note.
So, but if you do, let us know, and we'll definitely spread it out. But anyway, thank you for listening to Sweep. This is WVOF 80.5 Fairfield University, and we'll see you next week.